Hello everyone, and welcome back to Flying Through the Helicopter Flying Handbook. In this video, we're going to start in Chapter 11. Chapter 11 is all about helicopter emergencies and hazards. It's a kind of lengthy chapter because there's a lot of things that can happen when you're flying a helicopter. So the very first thing that we're going to cover is something we've talked about a little bit before, and that would be autorotations. So we already know that an autorotation is what you do if you had a power plant failure. And, how does that even work? Well, in normal flight, we talked about this a little bit when we talked about aerodynamics, we are sucking air down through the rotors. In an autorotative flight, instead, air is rushing up through the rotors in order to cause the rotors to spin. It'll cause the main rotor to spin, which causes the tail rotor to spin because they're connected through a transmission. So how do we accomplish this? Well, normally, like everything else, we're going to have a checklist. And I always tell my students, down, right, aft. Right? So the very first thing you want to do is you want to drop that collective and you want to lower that pitch on these main rotor blades so that they can actually turn. And the exact technique is going to vary a little bit from one helicopter to another. If you're flying something like the Schweitzer, it is very easy to do auto rotations in the Schweitzer. You could literally drop that collective and not touch it in most cases until you're ready to end the auto rotation. Robinson, especially R22, not so much. There's no inertia in the rotors. They spin down very quickly. In fact, you have 1.5 seconds tops to lower the collective in the Robinson, or your rotors will never ever spin up again if it's for real. So down, we drop the collective. Right pedal. Remember, when you put power in, that's left pedal. When you take power out, that's right pedal. And then aft. We want to pull slightly aft on the cyclic, and this will keep the helicopter from dropping its nose and picking up too much speed. Every helicopter is going to have its ideal autorotative speed. In the case of the Schweitzer, that's about 52 knots. If you go faster or slower than that, you will not glide the same distance. So I like to have a checklist that I use as I'm coming down, and it's very simple: spot, speed, and RPMs. Am I going to make it to my spot? If not, I can make adjustments. Now, in the real world, those adjustments could include changing my speed. For the purposes of a check ride, there's a tolerance on the speed, so I can't just do that. I might have to do something different if I was doing a check ride. Spot, speed. Am I going the recommended speed, which, for example, is 52 knots in the Schweitzer, and perhaps, say, 60 knots in the different Robinsons, 60 or 70, and it kind of depends on exactly what you're trying to do. And then RPMs. Are my RPMs going too high? I need to pull up on the collective a little bit. Are they too low? I need to drop the collective if it's not all the way down. And this is, again, something that's a little bit easier with some helicopters like the Schweitzer than others, like the Robinson, especially the 22. There's just no inertia there, and those blades are so light that they very quickly change their RPMs. Also, the range is much tighter on the Robinson. The range is something like roughly 400 to 500 RPMs on the Schweitzer, and the range on the Robinson is a few percent that you have to keep your blades in. And also, if you overspeed the Robinson blades, you have to have them inspected and make sure you didn't destroy a set of blades. Okay, so you're coming down, you're controlling the RPM with the collective, and of course your speed you control with a pitch. You can control where you're going to land if it's not a check ride, if it's a real situation, by altering your speed. But also if you're going to land long, you can do things like S turns if you had to as well. Now, doing an auto rotation is a bit risky, so we talk a lot about risk management. We don't normally practice these to the ground. The only people that do that are CFI applicants, and they actually need an endorsement in order to take a check ride to be able to say that this person is able to do an auto rotation to the ground. So it's kind of like airplanes. Airplanes, they used to make people do spins, and they figured out they were killing more people than they were saving with the spins training. So they said, oh, let's teach stall awareness. You can get 90% of the training with an auto rotation by doing a power recovery at the end. And again, the likelihood of you having to actually do an auto rotation for real is very small. We still want to be ready for it, but it's a pretty small thing. And doing a power recovery, we have maybe 90% of the training and 5% of the risk of balling up the helicopter. So we have a couple of different stages. We start, we're in flight, and then boom, we had an engine failure. Or if we're practicing, we drop the collective and roll the throttle off. Now, depending on the helicopter, again, you might have to hold the throttle off. In the Robinsons particular, you have to be careful with this. Schweitzers, you also have to hold it off because they both have a correlator. So if you pull the collective back in, it will pull the throttle in as well. So you're descending down right aft. We're doing our auto rotative descent here in 2. And we're doing our checklist, spot, speed, RPMs, spot, speed, RPMs. Okay, now we get to tens of feet above the ground. And typically you're talking between 10 and 40 feet. And again, it depends on the model helicopter, and look at the manual and see what's recommended. Then you're going to do a flare. So what's the purpose of this flare? 2 purposes. You want to reduce your forward and vertical speed, and you want to charge up these rotors so that you're going to transfer this kinetic energy of falling into stored energy or potential energy that is stored in this rotating disc. Then in 4, you're going to level the helicopter as you get closer to the ground. And if this is for real, then as you're approaching the ground, you will pull up on the collective and take all of that energy was stored in that rotor and hopefully use it to dissipate the vertical descent when you hit the ground here. Or in the case of practice, this is about where you're going to let the power come back in. So if it's a Schweitzer, you might just pull the collective, let the correlator do its job. We can talk a little bit more about that. And if it's a Robinson, you just get it above 80% and the governor will take it. Either way, be ready. If you're not close to your target RPM when you do this, then you might see some yawing motion in the helicopter. So be ready to correct for that. Another thing that I will say about auto rotations, if you're doing a full down auto rotation, or if you had to do this for real, you don't have to try to get rid of every bit of forward speed. I would much rather have a couple of knots of forward speed and slide on the ground than to hit it hard and just plop it onto the ground. So unless it's a very windy day when I'm doing full down auto rotations, I normally plan on sliding a little bit. Also, I wanted to mention that I have a lot of other videos on this channel here that talk about things like auto rotations, both in the simulator and in the actual aircraft. So I would encourage you to look at those as well. So let's go ahead and get flying. All right, so we're out here at Mount Pocono Airport today. It's a little windy. It's also been a little bit of snow, but that's pretty typical. And let me go ahead and I will take off, and then we'll cut to when we're on final, and we'll do a straight in auto rotation. All right, here we are. We're lined up on our final and we're ready to enter our auto rotation. And now we're going to do a quick bonus auto rotation straight in. I did want to real quickly go through the FAA list of common errors with the straight-in auto rotations. Number one, not understanding the importance of immediate entry into the auto rotation as soon as you have a power plant failure. Right? Again, we said this is especially important with the Robinsons, where they say you have at most 1.5 seconds before you're done. Right? Not using enough pedal when the power is reduced, so the thing will yaw to the left. Lowering the nose too much, and then you get into a big dive. Remember, it's downright aft. And how much aft? Really, it's just to maintain the pitch that you probably already had. Not maintaining the rotor RPM. Again, especially difficult with the Robinson. Applying up collective pitch at an excessive altitude. What happens then is you're going to have a hard landing. You could even strike the tail rotor if you're too extreme about it. Also, failing to level the helicopter before you touch down. If you touch down heel first, it's going to slam the nose down, and you might again strike the tail. Failing to minimize or eliminate lateral movement during ground contact. Basically, you might roll the thing over because you're sliding sideways. Failing to maintain ground track in the air and keep the landing gear aligned with the direction of travel during touchdown and ground contact. Again, If you're not sliding on the ground straight ahead, you might roll the helicopter. And finally, failing to go around if you're not within your limits, not having good risk management. So these are the things the FAA says are common errors when doing straight-in auto rotations. And with that, we will end this video and move on to the next section.